Usman Nurmagomedov leaks how Khabib's legendary legacy shaped his MMA future. If you limit your mixed martial arts viewing to fights that only occur in the UFC's Octagon, then you're missing out on something pretty special that's going on down at Bellator, namely the ongoing rise of Usman Nurmagomedov. And if you don't watch any fights that aren't taking place under the UFC's banner, then you may be asking, is this Usman guy related to Khabib? Well, the answer to that is yes. He's the former UFC champ's younger cousin. You might also be asking at this juncture, or at least you should be, so has Khabib had an impact on Usman's career? And how good of a fighter is he? How does he rank against Khabib? Well, those are all excellent questions, and we're going to dive into all of that in this video. But before we do, we have a couple of small requests for you. First off, if you don't watch fights outside of the UFC and claim to be a big MMA fan, you have some homework to do. Go watch some fights from other organizations, but not until you're done watching this video. After all, you can't really be a hardcore MMA fan if you limit your fight diet to only the UFC. Case in point, this would mean you haven't watched Usman Nurmagomedov fight, and you'll see in a minute why that is not a good thing. And for our second request, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like it and subscribe to KO Central MMA. After you completed watching the vid, please be sure to add your thoughts and insights in the comment section below. Alrighty, now with that out of the way, let's take a closer look at Usman Nurmagomedov, how Khabib has helped shape his fight game and career, and whether Usman could be headed for the GOAT debate just like his cousin. Usman Nurmagomedov begins championship road. As we noted off the top, Usman is the younger cousin of the legendary Khabib Nurmagomedov. The cousins are approximately 9 years apart in age. Usman was born in the Dagestani city of Kyzylyurt, which isn't far from the capital of Makhachkala. It should be noted that Usman is the younger brother of Umar Nurmagomedov, who is one of the UFC's rising bantamweight. So when you consider the family Usman was born into, it's not surprising that he's gone on to become one of the most highly touted fighting forces in mixed martial arts. Just like the rest of his family, Usman started training at a very young age, and he made his pro debut in 2017 at the age of 18. By that point, many hardcore fans and prospect pundits already had their spotlight firmly fixed on him. After all, not only is Usman from one of combat sport's superpowers in Dagestan, but yeah, because he's part of the Nurmagomedov family. By 2017, Khabib had already been laying waste to the UFC's lightweight division and had an eye-popping record of 24-0. Usman lived up to the hype and then some in his first few years of fighting. By 2020, Usman was 8-0 and he'd finished 7 of his opponents. And because by that time Khabib had established himself as the greatest lightweight on the planet, which included subbing Conor McGregor in the biggest fight in MMA history, the spotlight on any fighter carrying the Nurmagomedov name was a gazillion times bigger. Nurmagomedov wins Bellator gold. In 2021, Usman joined Bellator armed with a record of 11-0 that featured 10 finishes. Fans that were watching Usman for the first time quickly clocked that Usman was far from being just a ground specialist like his famous cousin Khabib or his teammate and buddy Islam Makhachev. Nope, as Usman had showcased in organizations like Guerrilla Fighting and UAE Warriors, his arsenal includes an array of nasty acrobatic kicks, a vicious clinch game, and dangerous hands, in addition to the famous Nurmagomedov wrestling, ground and pound, and submissions. That year, Usman proceeded to score wins over Mike Hamill, Manny Muro, and Patrick Piatella to set up a fight with Chris Gonzalez in July 2022. At the time, Gonzalez had established himself as one of Bellator's top lightweights by going 6-1 in the promotion. Further, on account of Gonzalez's accomplishments in Greco-Roman wrestling, many believed Nurmagomedov was in for one of his toughest tests to date. But that didn't really turn out to be the case, as Usman put Gonzalez away with a nasty-looking guillotine choke in round 1. On account of that victory, Nurmagomedov was tapped to fight the hard-hitting champion Patricio Pitbull Freire next. As many expected would be the case, Pitbull showcased a lot of toughness and heart in the scrap, But the well-rounded game of Usman proved to be too much for the rugged vet, and Nurmagomedov won the fight via unanimous decision. With Bellator's lightweight belt wrapped around his waist, the word was definitely getting out on how stupidly good Usman is. Case in point, Usman's coach Javier Mendez had this to say about Usman's victory over Freire while talking with MMA Junkie. He won easily, and it wasn't an easy fight, but he made it look easy, Mendez said. There were a few times when the fight wasn't too exciting, but that's because Patrick, he didn't do anything. He didn't do anything. He did everything perfectly. This kid is only 24 years old and has a lot to grow. In 2 or 3 years, when he does his growing, man, watch out. He's going to be one of the biggest stars in MMA. That's what I believe. Yup, you're not the only one, Javier. Khabib's legendary legacy. Now, it's well documented how many Galaxy-class fighters trained with Khabib and under his deceased father, Abdulmanap Nurmagomedov. Usman is certainly no exception in this regard, and the rising star has repeatedly talked about how much impact Khabib and his father have had on his career and his life. For example, recently an old and exclusive interview that Usman did following his second pro fight made the rounds online. If you need a refresher, that bout took place back in 2018. Khabib was reportedly in attendance for the fight, and it was crystal clear how much the legend's presence meant and how he had contributed to Usman's life. When asked what Khabib's presence meant, Usman noted, "The presence of Khabib is both motivation and pressure." Then the future champ said, "What motivates me most is that he's my brother and that he intended to follow in his footsteps." A few years later, as Usman prepared to make his Bellator debut, he spoke with the BBC and reported the same. "It's very motivational for me to fight under the Nurmagomedov name," Usman told BBC Sport. "I want to follow in Khabib's footsteps, follow his journey, and eventually become a better version of him. I learn everything from Khabib. Whenever I want to know or learn something, Khabib is there." And while discussing the tragic passing of his uncle Abdulmanap, Usman said this, "He taught me everything, not only as a fighter, but as a person too. He taught me how to talk to people, how to treat people. He taught me everything. I'm missing him a lot." Could Usman beat Prime Khabib? So, it's abundantly clear how much Khabib and his father contributed to Usman's development as a fighter, not only from a technical standpoint, but on how to be a winner. After all, Usman is only 25 years old, and he's the lightweight champion in one of the biggest MMA promotions. Further, as it stands right now, Usman is 17-0. That's a healthy sign of a winner. But as Nurmagomedov continues to rack up more wins and more people clue into how talented a fighter he is, a lot of people are asking if Usman could become a better fighter than Khabib. Hell, some have questioned if Usman might already be a more complete and dangerous smashing machine than his legendary cousin. Javier Mendez was the longtime striking coach of Khabib, and he's also been working with Usman for a few years now. The renowned coach had this to say about Usman earlier in 2023. "I've said it before when I trained him, that he's got the most skill out of everybody I have ever trained in my whole entire life. And what has he done? He's gone and proved it. He's done everything. All his fights showcase great jiu-jitsu, great wrestling ability, great striking, great mental work. There's no doubt that Usman's striking repertoire is much more comprehensive and advanced than Khabib's, or at least that's based on what the latter showcased in the cage during his career. As noted earlier, Usman's offense typically features a wide array of kicks and knees, which is not something we routinely saw from Khabib. Further, much of, if not all of, Khabib's striking was done as a means to set up his takedowns. Whereas with Usman, he's repeatedly used his strikes to finish fights, and he's done so in devastating fashion. That's not something we saw Khabib do much of during his storied career. And as we've discussed and shown, Usman is also a big-time threat with his wrestling and top game, just like his famous cousin. Now sure, there's a big difference between being a super talented and well-rounded fighter and one who goes out and amasses one of the greatest records the sport has ever seen. Even the biggest Usman boosters would have to concede that his resume doesn't match Khabib's, yet. After all, Khabib recorded impressive and one-sided victories over some of the greatest lightweights of his generation, dudes like Dustin Poirier, Conor McGregor, and Justin Gaethje. Usman has defeated big names like Patricio Freire and former UFC champ Benson Henderson. But Henderson was far removed from his prime when he faced Usman, and Freire isn't typically named in conversations about the solar system's best. So yeah, based on Usman's abilities, it's certainly possible we could see him put together a resume that matches Khabib, but the rising star still has some work to do in that department. What's next for Usman? Could it be the UFC? If Usman does intend to match his cousin's legacy, he's going to need to fight the best of the best to do so. Is that possible in Bellator? Even Bellator's biggest fans would likely admit no. Regardless of what you think of the UFC, there's no doubt it's the biggest MMA promotion on earth, and so its roster is the deepest in talent. So it'll be interesting to see if Usman makes a move to the UFC at some point. Right now, with his friend Islam Makhachev ruling the UFC's lightweight division, he may not want to make a move. But if Islam retires and the belt becomes available, that could all change. Who knows, maybe Islam will map out an exit plan for his career and Usman will look to join the UFC sooner than later. Similar to how things unfolded between Islam and Khabib. What do you think? Do you see Usman going on to match Khabib's legacy? And who do you think would win if the two could face off in their primes? Let us know in the comments section below, and if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like it and to subscribe to KO Central MMA.